The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't undo your last hire. The human postponer. They were the master of one phrase. I'll circle back on that. But 3 months later, you were the one doing all their work and wondering how big that circle is. But LinkedIn Hiring Pro can take the hiring load off your plate by automating the hiring busy work from the initial job post to scheduling interviews. Hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
And welcome to Howie the Podcast. It's Gav, and you join us today for an episode where we will look at a player who we think might be coming through the door at Sunderland because news dropped this week. That 20-year-old French sensation from Toulouse, and I'm going to butcher this, Dayann Methalie. I don't know. I'm going to ask the man who is my guest today to pronounce it properly. Back for the second time this summer. It is Baptiste Reynaud. Hello, mate.
Hey, hello, mate. Thanks for having me again. And great to see the influx of French talent coming the sides.
Told you it wouldn't be long, didn't I? I said,
yeah.
I can guarantee in the next couple of weeks I'll be back on you. Sure enough, here we are. Go on, then have a crack at pronouncing it, because I'm as everybody knows.
So I would Dayann Methalie is probably how I would pronounce it.
Dayann Methalie.
It might be Dayann, but I think it's probably Dayann. Like Diana, but you don't say the A at the end, and then Methalie, like metal, but with a harder T, Methalie.
And this is a player who was linked to us. He was actually linked to us when I last spoke to you. I remember actually we finished recording after chatting about Thomas Meunier, and we were chatting a little bit about him, and I'd said to you, oh, by the way, like he's been linked with Sunderland, and you were like, oh, yeah, that's interesting because he's hotly tipped. I mean, If Sunderland really are about to spend around 30 million euros on him, who exactly are we getting?
A very exciting talent. I mean, I have to say, Florent Ghisolfi is doing excellent work at Sunderland. Obviously, with Lebris, they're identifying clearly talented players in different roles, right? I mean, obviously, we talked about Thomas Meunier, different stage of his career, but Methalie, I think for me is a very exciting signing, and actually, I think it's been said that he would join for around 30 million euros, I think.
Yeah.
Which, considering his age and the fact he re-signed a contract in November of last year, and extended his contract, I think is pretty good value, I would say. But he's obviously very young. He's 20, turned 20 earlier this year, and young in terms of experience at the highest level. He really had a breakthrough year this year. Hadn't played last season, as in the 2024-2025 season. Hadn't played, but was often in the squad list, but just never came on. And then, as Toulouse kickstarted that last season, he kind of made the left back role his, and was really, really impressive in a variety of ways. I mean, what's interesting is that he's played as a left back, but more as a left wing back. For Toulouse, they tended to play quite a fluid system, but tended to start it with three at the back, and he'd be one of the wing backs. Physically very impressive. 1.88 meter tall, very, very fast, very good on the ball because he was a little bit like Meunier. He started as an attacking midfielder when he was younger, and then was pushed back. So a very dynamic player that can fit a lot of systems, I think, and a fully fledged France under-21 international with 4 caps. So, for me, a very, very promising signing. One that makes a lot of sense when you consider the price tag for someone of that age who's burst through the ranks at a club like Toulouse, we've seen JD Canvaux at Crystal Palace do quite well, and he was a Toulouse guy, and their youth setup has been good over the years. So it makes a lot of sense. It ticks a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, if I stopped, say, I don't know, 5-10 Toulouse supporters in the street, and I asked them about him, what would they say, do you think? How is he seen by their fans?
I think Toulouse fans are very proud of the fact that their academy produces quite a lot of players, certainly over the last few years, but I'd say maybe over the last 15, 20 years. Even looking back, you look at somebody like Moussa Sissoko back in the days, Etienne Capou, right, who obviously played in the Premier League. People who
Yeah,
played
yeah.
for France as well. So good players. There's a good system there, and their manager who's left over the summer, I think, to join Leverkusen, Carlos Martins Noel, had done a good job over the last 3 years of bringing players through. So I think a lot of Toulouse fans would say um, he's very talented. He's very exciting to watch especially going forward. I think he's somebody who obviously still needs to learn the trade a little bit. He's only, if I can put it that way, he's only got one full season of top flight experience behind him. No previous loans. Really came through the ranks, and so I think if you're a Toulouse fans, you're probably thinking another one of our young pups leaves early, but he still has much to learn. So the value for the deal is probably a relatively fair one, although I think they could have maybe pushed for a little bit higher. And yeah, I think the thing with Methalie is he's very enthusiastic. He's a very interesting character. Um, I wouldn't say he's gung ho, but he was also an interesting stat is he was one of the players who fouled the most in Liga. And I think that's not from a nasty side. I think that just comes from a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy. And that's something he's reflected on and has said he's had to work on. But I think for me, what's also interesting about him is that, as I said, he was in this, on the squad list for a number of games towards the second half of last season and never came on. And in interviews this year, he did say that, he called upon a psychiatrist to kind of help him through because he was getting frustrated and he was trying to channel that energy and that frustration. And he said with the help of his psychiatrist and his manager, he kind of found the right way to go about his business, and he delivered a very impressive season.
It sounds like it's been quite the breakthrough there, doesn't it? Really, and obviously Sunderland fans can sympathise because we, you mentioned their first full season. We signed players last year who had only had one full season behind them.
Yeah.
He's burst onto the scene and as an academy prospect who people have taken too quickly. Well, we've got our own in Chris Rigg. I think Sunderland are viewed as a club who are a great destination for young players to be able to come and thrive and, importantly, be given the time and the space to grow, because at a lot of clubs, they might have a policy of signing youth, but then maybe the manager loses faith in youth very easily. And we have a manager who clearly doesn't. You look at Reggie Slippery's with that background. Do you think that's probably what's weighed in our favour with trying to get him in? Because, he is well fancied. You've seen the clubs that have been courting him for a while now. I mean, Newcastle, probably the most notable team who'd been linked with him back in January and apparently had been watching him right through the summer too. Do you think that's probably why, other than the fact there's a lot of money involved, is that probably why you think Sunderland might have been the choice for him to move for the next stage of his career?
100%. I think Florent Gisolfi and Régis Lebris in particular deserve a lot of credit. I think if you look back at Régis Lebris' career, he was somebody who went through academies. That was his path to becoming a manager at Lorient, right? I think he was in charge of the youth teams at Rennes,
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah, then at Lorient. He's somebody who clearly puts a lot of emphasis on youth development. And Enzo Lefebvre at Lorient was one of the many players who benefited from that approach and who clearly developed. If you look at Dango Ouattara, who's been very impressive in the Premier League, Lorient took the time with him, and then he burst onto the scene under Lebris, right? So I think if you're a young player, but particularly a young French player, I believe that you look at Sunderland as a destination where the decision makers are French and certainly French speaking, obviously. I think the owner as well is obviously French speaking and has real desire, it seems, to build something. Kirill Louis-Dreyfus obviously learned what happened when his dad tried to manage Olympique de Marseille, which is probably one of the most unstable clubs in world football. And so I think if you're a young player like Dayann Methalie, you should be smartly looking at what's going to be my next positive step. And if you, and with all due respect to Sunderland, that are a big club, if you're moving to a more traditional big club, if I can put it that way, with no real sense of continuity and focus on youth development, then you're taking a huge risk. If you're looking at your career going forward and you're trying to make a calculated and sensible risk, then it strikes me that Sunderland, with its structure and the people behind it and at the forefront of it, are exactly the kind of club that you would want to join. So, and I think that's a great thing for Sunderland. It's one way of developing your club, to be able to trust youngsters and to know that if if you push them as high as you can, then either the club will go really far, or you will have the opportunity to sell players while they still have value. And I think that's a model that's been adopted by a lot of clubs. But for me, for sure, I mean, I thought that when Enzo Lefebvre joined Sunderland, that was such a massive statement as to Régis Lebris, frankly speaking. And
Yeah.
he's done nothing but good work since. And players talk amongst themselves. And I think if you're in the France under 21 camp, there must be a couple of guys who've come across Régis Lebris or know players who either play for him or have played for him. And that can only be a positive thing, that kind of message gets disseminated across the French youth setup, certainly for Sunderland.
Yeah. Tell us about his journey to Toulouse. And I know you mentioned before he came through the academy there. Was he always viewed as a top prospect? Has his rise been expected? Has he surprised people? Because we're talking about a guy who you mentioned before. He's had one full season of football, completely burst onto the scene. To go from a year ago basically being a B team player, an academy player, to then a year later being seen as worth 30 million euros. Like what a rise that is. I mean, has this guy just been blowing people away in France, which is why his reputation's grown?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is he has been very good, and he's been allowed to shine at a club that gives opportunities to youngsters. And I think also in a position where, if you're a left wing back in the back five, then and you're good going forward, then that's always going to be appreciated a lot more to the naked eye than the defensive work, right? And
Yeah.
I think that allows you to shine it a little bit more. His rise I wouldn't say has been unexpected, but I think, and I'm not, I don't have the ins and outs of all the academies, and there are people well better placed than me to probably state on that. But whereas somebody like JD Canvo was a name that was, I wouldn't say that was whispered on many lips, but that came across as, watch out, as soon he's gonna come through and he's gonna play and he's gonna do impressive. Dayann Methalie wasn't really in that mold, I think. So, it's been real massive improvements. I think there was obviously some sort of halfway confidence in him the season prior to that, because he was part of the group for a certain number of matches. The fact he didn't come on meant that even the club thought that something was perhaps missing, and that's something he's addressed in his interviews. And as I said, did a great step of talking to psychiatrists and talking to his managers to what can he do better, how can he channel his energy, etc. So that maybe explains why his name wasn't always familiar with a lot of people. As for the price tag, I mean, I think this is just the Premier League is what it is. There are no other leagues capable of putting that amount of money. Certainly, I think Sunderland obviously had a great season last year, but it was their first season back in the Premier League. For them to have those financial means so quickly is not possible across other leagues across Europe. So good for Sunderland. I think if you're, I just want to point out that if you support other leagues or you're outside of the UK, certainly of the Premier League, then the feeling might be that the Super League does already exist and is the Premier League. But if it allows, I think for France, as a France fan, if it allows players to travel that well-trodden path and develop and contribute to Les Bleus now being managed by the great Zinedine Zidane, then all the better for it.
Yeah. break his game down a little bit. You mentioned he's an attacking left back, but is he comfortable on the ball? Is he a progressive passer? Does he like to overlap? Does he invert? I'm trying to work
Yeah.
out in my head what kind of wing back, left back he is, and actually what he's probably like in comparison to what we've already got in Ronaldo Mandava, because that's a player you'll be aware of, obviously, because he played quite a lot of football in France. So I mean, when you're pitting them against each other, are they similar? Are they different? Like, what can we kind of expect from an all-round game perspective?
Yeah, I'd say Methalie is very comfortable on the ball. He's willing to take people on, and that's also been helped by playing wing back, right? You're being tasked with basically playing two roles into one. A full back and the wide midfielder. So you are given that freedom that maybe somebody playing as a more traditional left back might not have. But having said that, he is very comfortable on the ball. He also grew as the season went on. I think he scored goals towards the end of the season. He got 2 goals and 2 assists last year, and they came towards the end of the season. So you could tell he was growing more and more comfortable into the role he was being asked to play. But certainly, when you look at his pace, his physical stature, he's a tall guy for a left wing back. He's over 6 feet. I think there's a lot to like. If you look at the 2 goals he scored last season, there were some good runs, and he looked very comfortable and very composed when finishing. So I think that's certainly very positive in terms of where he's probably lacking compared to Ronaldo. Is Ronaldo obviously had his development at Lille and then at Atletico Madrid, which if you're going to play for Atletico, you are going to have to learn how to defend. And that's not a stereotype of Diego Simeone. That's just, you step it up a level and it's also a basic expectation. You look at a French great like Antoine Griezmann, when he joined Atletico Madrid from Real Sociedad, he said, I had to learn 6 months how to move, how to defend, how to fit within the system. And I think that's probably where it's fair to say, in any case, based on experience, that Ronaldo is probably a lot more advanced than Methalie. What's going to be interesting for me is what position is Methalie going to play? Is he going to play? And I know Lebris has alternated at times, from what I remember you telling me and from what I've seen. Is he going to play as a more traditional left back? Is he going to play as a left wing back? I think that's going to be interesting. But if there are people good enough to develop youngsters, then Regis Lebris is near the top of the list at the moment, I would say.
So is that a concern, or more just an area of work he needs in terms of defensively? Because when I hear wing back, I normally think, that means he can't defend, because you're not trusted to play as an out and out left back. And I know that's probably a little bit unfair, because that's not always the case. But do you know what I mean when I say that? Is like, if I hear wing back, it normally makes us think, this guy's just pure all out attack. What's his like kind of defensive positioning, 1v1 defending, like, recovery pace? You mentioned his physicality and stuff, but is he solid, or?
I think he's got physical attributes that greatly help him. He's very fast. He's strong, right? And he's capable of winning balls in the air with his height. So I think he's very impressive. I think the roots are there for him to become a very complete left back, if I'm honest. It's more about learning how to channel that energy. And I think positioning, when you're asking a 20-year-old, is he the finished package? Which I know that's not what you're asking, but you've got to temper your expectations based on the experience that he has as well. And I know the price tag makes that difficult, but he's somebody who's still learning his trade, has incredible attributes, and has shown that there's a lot of very exciting things about what he can already produce. But there will definitely be some learning along the way. And the fact that he's 20, but I think he was moved back to the left back slot, I think when he was 16 or 17, means he's had a lot of time for that side of the pitch to be drilled into him. But at the same time, that's not a lot of time, if I make any sense. Yeah. So I think, for me, the way I would put it is, Sunderland should expect somebody who's very energetic, who's skilled on the ball, but is also still very raw. And I think that stat about being one of the players who commits the most fouls in Ligue 1 is probably representative of the fact that he has great enthusiasm, but also that at times his positioning might be a little wayward, or that he has to be in slight recovery mode, which you might not get from somebody who's, a lot more experienced like Ronaldo. He's probably somebody who'll be more prone to, staying on his feet and being well positioned and having that guile and know-how that somebody like Methalie just can't have at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about Ronaldo at Atletico and having to learn to defend quickly. I think maybe not as regimental as perhaps playing under Diego Simeone. I don't know. But certainly the case of Reggie Celebrity, you need to know how to defend. We saw it last year with Arthur Masuaku and Simon Adingra. They didn't last because they couldn't defend and they made mistakes in games, and he lost faith very, very quickly. So it's certainly true of us as well. I'm trying to think here. You kind of described them too as there. I've got a rough idea in my head, but who, if Sunderland fans listen, as Premier League fans or whatever, who in the Premier League or who out there, who people would know, would you say he's most like, if they were trying to, off the top of your head, you were trying to think of a player who maybe plays fullback either in the Premier League or in a top league, who you would compare to, or even somebody from the past who he might compare to, like who springs to mind when you think about his best attributes and the way he plays?
Yeah, I think it's tricky, because I don't watch as much Premier League as I did in the past. And so, I don't, it's difficult for me to compare to someone present, but maybe, and I don't want to compare to someone in the past because he's just not a finished article. I think it's a little bit difficult. So I want to be fair. I think the way I would look at it is he's probably a better, more complete version of Diouf, who was at West Ham.
All right, okay.
Maybe not so elegant in his crossing, because I think that because Diouf, I think, has a one with a left foot. But I think in the sense of just being very dynamic going forward and being very comfortable on the ball, but still having to learn his trade. I think that's, I think that's not. I would like to think that's not unreasonable.
No, I think no, I hadn't even thought of that name, but now you say it, yeah. And he's somebody who actually, despite the fact West Ham obviously got relegated last season, he's somebody who came out of their season with a lot of credit and has actually been linked all over the place with big moves and stuff. So no, I could totally say that.
Yeah, I think that probably. I'm not sure their styles are. I think they have slightly similar styles, but I think in terms of where they're at, in terms of their career and their experience and what's being asked of them, that's probably somebody who's quite similar. But obviously, what reassures me is that I don't know for Diouf's background. I don't know enough about him, despite having watched him play. What I would say is Methalie comes from a club that has, as I said, it has been focused on developing youngsters and has done very well going about it. If you look at Convo, who's the most recent example, I think he's been very impressive for Crystal Palace, right? And he was only 19 or 20 when he joined them for big money. So there's a baseline there that's strong, I think, in terms of how to develop youngsters. And so that reassures me. And what reassures me, as we've talked about, is the fact he's joining a club who's genuinely committed to making sure that those players improve individually and collectively, and they have the right people at the helm to promote that. And I'm hoping to give somebody like him some time to play through the pains, right? At some point, and I can imagine if he steps into the first team, the natural point would always be the sort of Christmas period, right? Where that becomes difficult for anybody who's not played in the Premier League. He's got to be allowed to play through his pains, and there will be growing pains along the way. But I think the package that he's representing at the moment is very exciting. As you said, when we were offline, just chatting a bit after the Meunier episode, I think my reaction kind of said it all. When I was like, "Oh, this is a very positive signing," and I would have thought that. I didn't necessarily think he was going to leave this summer, but I would have thought that if he was going to leave, again, with all due respect to Sunderland, it might be for a quote unquote bigger club. But actually, that makes a lot of sense for all parties involved.
Yeah. I mean, we actually did this quite a bit last year as well, where we
Mm.
signed players probably a window earlier than
Mm.
maybe bigger clubs would. Noah Siddiqui being probably the biggest
Mm.
example, because he was apparently wanted by everybody, but everybody was looking at him and going, "Is it a year
Mm.
too early to spend that kind of money on him?" And the same was said about Robin Roofs and Habib Diarra even, you know? So
Mm.
we've
Yeah.
got we are prepared to take gambles on these players maybe a year or so early, and yeah,
Yeah.
perhaps that's what we've seen in him. We've kind of looked and went, "Oh, yeah, actually, if we wait any longer than this,
Mm.
somebody bigger and more impressive ultimately is gonna come along and take this guy," and you don't know, do you really? But that's kind of my
Yeah.
feeling on this.
Yeah, I think it's a good shout, and I think Sunderland are a club that are not overly impatient, and they're willing to give time. And I think I think Habib Diarra was a very interesting signing because he's young, but somebody who had a huge amount of experience for his age. And yeah, I think even in France, people would have maybe thought, what's the highest he can achieve? Everybody liked him at Strasbourg. I personally did. I thought it was a very smart signing, but it was always a sense of what's his glass ceiling. Is it just to be a very good player at Strasbourg, for which there's no harm with that. All respect to anybody who plays up to that level, but it was a sense of, can you go a bit higher up? And in a way that question hasn't necessarily been answered, in the sense that people might look at
Mm.
it, certainly in France, higher up would have maybe been like a top 4 in another league, right? But he's come to an intermediate step, if I can put it that way, but one that's where he can express himself and be surrounded by people who will welcome him, will want to improve him, and obviously the lack of a language barrier is very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Right, we'll quickly shoot for an ad break, and then when we come back, we'll round things off on this particular conversation. So we'll see you back in a minute. Welcome back to Howie the Podcast. And yes, just before we went to the break there, we were chatting even more about Dayann Methalie. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Try me. I'm really trying to get that right. So yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. I'll probably go back to reverting the type after I've came off this call and I'm talking to other Matthews and we're all struggling to pronounce names as we normally do. But I wanted to touch on something that I think I mentioned earlier about Newcastle, because he was linked to Newcastle in January. And I mean, if you believe what you read, he was pretty much signed. They were ready to go. And then he picks up an injury and it doesn't happen. I mean,
Mm.
what, when we're talking about this being a year early for him to come to Sunderland, Newcastle were
Mm.
prepared to buy him in January. So obviously, he is a player that clubs all over Europe are watching and thinking, like, even off the back of a small amount of games, because I don't know how many games he played by January, but it must have only been 10, 15 tops, something like
Yeah.
that. You know, he's obviously somebody who's well thought of beyond the fact he's just playing first team football in France. Like, I'm guessing internationally, playing for France at youth level and things like that, that he's ticking all the right boxes for a number of clubs. But obviously, like I say, that Newcastle deal could have happened had he not picked up an injury.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of points there as well. Toulouse, certainly last summer, they were very wary of letting people go. Obviously, they let Canvo leave for Crystal Palace, but they pretty much put a veto for any other players to leave. And I think that came along as the season went on. I think they were also very keen not to lose somebody over the winter, because it's very disruptive, and he'd been very productive for the club. The injury obviously didn't come at a right time for Newcastle. I guess what I would have a word of caution is, I think Newcastle are not in the same mindset as Sunderland are. Um, they're more prone, with the financial backing that they have, they're more prone to jumping at the next big sensation and not necessarily thinking it through. That's maybe a harsh criticism, but I think those clubs with those financial means tend to have a bit more of a scattered approach than a club who's going to be a bit more targeted about its spending or its needs or its philosophy. And I think Sunderland definitely have a philosophy at the moment at their club. So I think those are elements that I would consider. And I would imagine maybe conversations as well with the player at the time. Wouldn't surprise me if it suddenly made sense to him to think, let me have a full season under my belt under a coach I trust and that trusts me, rather than going straight away to a club where I'm not going to have the same focus. They're not going to have the same focus on my development.
Or opportunities, right? First team,
Opportunities, yeah.
Playing behind. To be fair, Lewis Hall, very good player. He probably wouldn't have played much.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think it's also, if you're him, and that's what I mean about Newcastle. It's that might come at a time when Lewis Hall got injured or looked tired, and they had, and the easiest thing was just to sign someone in that position who's young and exciting, and that can give the sense of he might be discarded as soon as Hall comes back, or vice versa. So it didn't strike me as long-term strategy. And the final point I would make, though, is, and I know I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think a lot of clubs would have looked at Methalie based on the work that's been done at Toulouse. I think you can't discount clubs that do long-term positive work at developing their players. I think you will be more reassured at seeing a player come through the ranks at a club like Toulouse, much like a club like Nantes was back in the days in France, a club like Rennes recently, who developed some of the greatest youngsters in world football. You'll be more reassured as a buying club if you see those players, even if they burst through like Methalie did, burst through those ranks, then look great in a struggling team that doesn't have that philosophy. And I think that's a real statement about how Toulouse have gone about doing their work in the last few years. And as I said, if you're a buying club and you're looking at how JD Convo integrated within Crystal Palace, a club not too dissimilar to Sunderland, I think, in terms of their ambition, right? Maybe and their position in English football at the moment. Then you're thinking, well, Methalie might have had a bit more of a whirlwind season rather than constant progress, but he comes from a club that has instilled the right values and has the right training at its disposal to create good players.
Yeah, I'm in my head, I'm thinking he just never wanted to play for Newcastle because he always wanted to come to Sunderland. That's what I'm thinking,
yeah.
anyways. I'll believe anything. How quickly do you think he'll be expected to fit straight in then? Because, as I said, we aren't scared to give people chances if they're good enough, they're old enough. We're not bothered about lack of experience, But then he does have Ronaldo in front of him, who, yeah, fair enough. Ronaldo isn't getting any younger. He's probably in the twilight of his career, and I think he's got a year left on his deal as well. So obviously the football club are looking ahead slightly. But what's your sort of thought process though? Would you expect a player who's moving for that kind of money and is probably courted for a lot of clubs, or by a lot of clubs, should I say? Are you thinking he's probably expecting to play relatively straight away, or do you reckon he's coming in to be eased in and would be relatively happy with that? Like, where do you think this kind of move would be positioned? Because ordinarily, I've got to say, young player coming into a football club, they're going to just get, bucket loads of time. He might not even kick a ball until January or whatever. But then there's part of us thinks about the fee and just thinks it's a big move for him. He's going to want to keep playing football. So, like, what do you think? Where do you see this at?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't know what Lebris is thinking. He's obviously the person best placed to answer that question. I think he's obviously going to come in with an expectation of being involved. Now, the good thing for Sunderland is that you have more opportunities for involvement that you might have had last season. You've got European football coming your way, which is great news. So there'll naturally be the potential for rotation, because it's going to be a long season. And as you said, if you've got somebody like Reynaud who's getting on in terms of football years, obviously still a young man, with a year left in his contract, there's also a little bit of uncertainty around that. So I think there's a context in which he's going to be asked to play a good amount of football. What's always interesting with young players, and I think young French players, because they have the development in France does allow for really well-rounded players and who are also quite level-headed, I think, without wanting to stereotype, and I'm sure there are other examples, is that the good thing about young French players is that they are quite adaptable. And um, and so, you could see him coming in and with his youth just kind of bursting onto the scene again, and you just can't drop him, or he could be asked to be sort of patiently phased in. And I would like to think he has the intelligence, not knowing him, that he has the intelligence to do that. I think coming at a club where the manager speaks your own language, and I'm sure they will have had discussions about that. And I'm sure that will have played a part in his move, right? Whichever way it's going to go, is that will have had some reassurance about what kind of role he's expected to play in the short and long term, is why I think it's a good fit. So I'm half answering your question, I think, but it strikes me that there's a good developmental path for him, whether it's starting straight away or whether it's being integrated into the team under kind of Lebris and Reynaud's stewardship, whilst being ready to really burst into the scene in the second half of the season. I think that's what makes it, for me, an exciting signing, because surely they would have discussed it. And I think we've seen from players who've joined Sunderland that they seem to understand what their role is, and actually the dressing room seems quite healthy. So I wouldn't be, not that you were worried, but I wouldn't be worried about what's going to happen to Methalie in his first season in that sense.
Yeah. How good do you think this lad can actually become? Because big money for a young player, already playing for France at under 21s level, trajectory. What is it like? What's his ceiling? Where do you see his kind of career going?
Yeah, honestly, it's too early for me to say. I think there's the money at the moment. Premier League is stupid money. I think the youngster who's just joined Newcastle, I think, what's his name? Bamba. What's his name?
Bamba, it is Bamba.
Yeah, the midfielder. Yeah, the midfielder from Monaco. He's only played 15 games also in Liga, and he's joining for tens of millions, right? So in a way, the money doesn't really speak to me anymore, because there's such a massive inflation with Premier League money that it's a league that spends in a ridiculous way compared to other leagues. So we've lost all sense of whether it's a big money move or not. It's obviously a big money move for him and for Toulouse, but I think it doesn't strike me as a crazy amount of money, considering the current market with Premier League clubs for players 21 and under, who are also under 21 internationals for countries like France. As to how great can he be? Well, I think French academy football has a proven pathway of developing very, very good players not just over the last few years, but over the last 30 or so years, right? And he's certainly looked very impressive. Is he going to be more, is he going to be a Gaël Clichy light, or is he going to be a better version of that? No, I think he's certainly somebody who looks well equipped for modern football, and the proof is going to be in his attitude, but also the time he's being given and the actual focus day to day on his development. And that's something that's difficult to gauge in somebody who's only had one full season and is already moving clubs. But what gives me hope is that, as I've mentioned a couple of times, he joins an environment that seems conducive to that development. We'll obviously see what happens if Sunderland start the season poorly, which I don't wish. But if that were to happen, then different kind of pressure is being laid at the feet of different people. And that's when the philosophy and the structure you've developed can kind of be blown up, which I don't think is going to happen at Sunderland. But there are all those parameters and external context that you can't vouch for. But from what I've seen so far, it's a very exciting signing. That's what I can say.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that one of the big selling points from our perspective will have been, come to us, we'll make you great. You want to play for France? We'll get you there. You want to play European football next season? We'll get you there. You want to play for an elite football club in 3, 4, 5 years' time? We'll get you there. And I imagine that's the way we sell the football club to people, because some of the talent that we've managed to bring in kind of does beg a belief to a degree. For me as a Sunderland fan, I think, how on earth have we found this player? Who is he? Like, where did we find him from? And how come we've got there ahead of all these other clubs? And I genuinely think in a lot of cases it is that. We are telling players, we will give you the platform, we will let you grow, we will turn you into the player you want to become. And for him, I fully imagine that he will be thinking, 4 years from now, I want to play at the World Cup. I want to be a France left back.
Yeah.
And to be fair, when you look at the quality they've got at full back, no disrespect, but there's no reason why he shouldn't have those dreams, really.
Totally understandably so. And I think if you're, I think you're right in what you said about Sunderland. I think that's a great model to have. I also believe that if you're Methalie and you're trying to take a step up even in terms of visibility, I think French clubs were not going to have the financial means, apart from PSG, to take you away from Toulouse, right? So if you wanted to be visible to your national team manager, then staying in France was only going to be Toulouse, which would have made a lot of sense for confirmation of your status and your quality, but perhaps a little bit less visibility. And if you want the most visibility in one of the most challenging leagues in the world, then the Premier League is obviously as good a choice as you're going to get, especially considering the fact that even big clubs in Spain, outside of the top three, even within the top three, but outside the top three, or Italy or Germany, you have limited clubs that are going to put up that investment that need a player in this position. So a club like Sunderland, to me, makes total sense for him and for the club, right? And that's what I've liked about Sunderland spending since Régis Lebris has been there, is that you could see it all fits within a clearly defined strategy. And that's why, we've talked about two players, Thomas Meunier and Dayann Methalie. They're at polar opposite ends of their career. But yet, it all makes complete sense when you look at what Sunderland are trying to achieve with the means at their disposal and the people behind the scenes. And I think that's why I'm really positive about Sunderland as a whole, but also when I see those signings, I see, as you said, Methalie joining a club that develops him, and where there's a clear opportunity for him to step into that left back role, whether short term or longer term. And by longer term, I mean in less than a year, right? Which is what you want as a young player. So just all very sensible and reasonable. As to whether it will work out, who knows? But at least you can, certainly the view from France is A, Sunderland is getting a bit more recognition. And B, their transfer business is unsurprising in a good way.
Yeah, it certainly helps when you see footage of Enzo Lefebvre wrapping one in from 30 yards with his left foot against Liverpool at the weekend,
I have to say, I did have to do a double take when you signed Enzo Lefebvre, because I watched him at Lorient. He'd been a player who'd been touted for a long time at Lorient as this really talented youngster. And he always seemed to be a little bit on the periphery. And then he was fully trusted by Régis Lebris. And they had, a first half of the year before they had to sell big players at Lorient, the Ouattara, Terem Moffi, I think maybe even Lefebvre, where they played really great football. And he was at the center of it. And when Sunderland signed him, I thought,
in the Championship as well.
Yeah, but also it just too many things seem to click at the right time.
Yeah.
New manager, needed a technical leader. Enzo Lefebvre's career, through no fault of his necessarily, had just gone a little bit sideways. He'd done his time at Rennes, joined a difficult context at Roma with a lot of instability. He just needed somebody to believe in him and for that stability, and Lebris brought that to him. And I think that's what Lebris in general and Sunderland are bringing to players right now. That's what they're proposing to players, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh, he's our best player. I love him. I could do another hour with you talking about Enzo Lefebvre. Maybe we will do that one day, innit? You never know. But let's round off with some quick fire questions. These ones, nice, easy ones for you to answer quickly. One word to describe Dayann Methalie.
Energetic.
Biggest strength?
Pace.
biggest weakness?
Discipline, but not in a harsh way. I just want to
Yeah.
caveat that. Not in a I'm getting a red card, I'm violent. Just in still having to learn his trade.
We call that young and daft. Yeah. Best performance you've seen from him?
Against Lyon, I think he either had a goal or an assist, but he gave the runaround to Clinton Mata, who I think not a lot of players know about Clinton Mata, but he was very, very solid for Lyon last year, and Lyon had a good season. He was very, very impressive in that game.
One thing Sunderland supporters will love immediately.
His enthusiasm.
One thing they might have to be patient with.
His inexperience.
And out of 10, how excited should Sunderland supporters be if this deal happens?
So if I'm going to do this like L'Équipe in France do, I don't know if you've ever seen the L'Équipe ratings after a game, but they're very sort of, you have a decent game, it's a 5 out of 10. No, I'd say an 8 out of 10. I'm very excited about this move.
And I guess finally, if this transfer is completed tomorrow, what's your message to Sunderland supporters about the player they're getting?
He's really caught the eye in France. He comes from a good club, and he's a very modern fullback or wingback, and I think that's a good statement of intent from Sunderland that they can attract those sorts of players.
Well, Baptiste, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure once again. Thank you for all of your insight. The first pod we did with you went down really, really well. So when I told people that we were doing this again today, they were over the moon, and I'm sure they've really enjoyed your insight. And let's hope we haven't wasted our time. It looks like the deal's going to happen. It's not quite over the line. I mean, it's being reported in L'Équipe now that the clubs are in talks to try and get this one over the line, and that a deal has been agreed with the player, a 5-year contract. So for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's going to happen, but this is football. Things can change, but you've certainly helped me to get a little bit more excited about what we can expect from Dayann Methalie. So thank you very much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me on. And don't hesitate on Twitter and contact us. Any questions on French football in general and on certain players, if we can help, do follow us at a Classic Pod and obviously give us a listen once in a while. French football is full of those young players, those young talents, and it tied itself as the League of Talents a couple of years ago, and I think it was right to do so. It should keep doing so, because a lot of the players you see in the Premier League doing great stuff started somewhere, and a lot of them started in Ligue 1. So, don't hesitate.
Absolutely, yes. Get on board with Le Classique Podcast, and I think it's probably a worthwhile thing to do with Sunderland fans anyways, because looks like that's what we're going to do every time the transfer window opens, is just head to France, see who's out there, pick the bones out of it. I can't wait to see. This will not be the last time we speak this summer, I'm sure, mate.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Let's hope we do get back together at some point over the summer. Thank you very, very much.
No, thanks again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And thank you to our listeners. We'll be back with another pod tomorrow as we build towards that game in the USA against Leeds United. We've also got a game at the weekend against Wrexham. So there's lots of podcasts coming around those games. We are going absolutely nowhere. And if there is anything to react to, we will do just that here on the pod and over at rokerreport.sbnation.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, wherever you prefer to get your social media content from. We are there, so make sure you follow us there. And just say thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.